Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Guarisco, and I'm here with Michael Pellissier. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a great rating on iTunes. You can tweet us your questions at B.E.S.T Podcast NOLA using the hashtag BestQuestions, and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of each show. Today, we're going to be discussing the Anthony Davis trade demand and the Pelicans' future. We'll be reacting to the NOLA no call and criticizing the commissioner's lack of response and plenty more. Let's tip off with the story of the week, and that's AD. Michael, what's your take on Anthony Davis demanding a trade?
I'm not surprised. I think this is something that's been a long time coming. I think he was going to treat this year as if the Pelicans were winning, he could possibly stay. But I think as soon as there was any sort of sign of them not doing well, I think he was really lining himself up to demand a trade. The reason I say that mainly is because he actually switched to a different agent this year. It's the same agent as LeBron. And then all of a sudden he's demanding trade rumors to Los Angeles. The whole thing feels at least a little bit scripted.
Do you think Los Angeles is the preferred destination?
I don't have any doubt that that's where Davis wants to go. And I think it's important to look at the timeline of all of this. So at some point in the last few days, Davis demanded a trade, or he basically said, I won't sign an extension here, and he prefers to be traded. If you look at sort of the progression of all the things that he said, he started with that, and then all of a sudden he he said that it's not just the Lakers. It's I would also be okay with the Bucks and the Knicks, and I think there was one other team in there. But really what he's trying to do is they're trying to get him traded to Los Angeles before Boston Celtics can trade the Pelicans. And the reason that they're trying to do that is because that's where Davis wants to go, but also because the Celtics have a much better trade offer in play for Davis, but they can't do it until this summer. So basically Davis's camp is trying to pull in every lever that it can to make it seem like he doesn't want to go to the Celtics. He wants to go to the Lakers so that the Celtics will basically pull out of the race, so to speak. And then that way the Lakers offer, which is probably better than almost any other offer that's out there right now, is the one that the Pelicans will take.
What's going on? Is that what's going on inside the Pelicans organization right now? The trade deadline is Thursday. Are they just hearing from a bunch of teams right now? What's going on inside the organization?
I don't have any doubt that they're talking to a lot of teams right now. The real question is, which of these teams actually have a package that would appeal to the Pelicans? And because of a weird rule where basically Boston Celtics cannot acquire AD this season because they have Kyrie on their roster, the Pelicans have no incentive to do this now. They really should be waiting to see this summer what kind of offers come in. Because ultimately, what's going to hold other teams accountable in terms of their offers is the fact that Boston's been gunning for this for a long time now. They've been building up a bunch of assets. They've been wanting Davis for a long time. And so to cut it off now and to trade anybody would be, in my mind, a very foolish move. I think they should wait, and I think that they'll wind up getting a much better return if they do.
You think they should wait for Boston, you're saying?
Yeah, I think they should wait till this summer. Yeah, I think they should definitely wait out the deadline. I don't see any reason why they should trade him now, other than obviously there's some risk of injury or whatever.
Michael, what do you think is an acceptable offer from the Los Angeles Lakers?
I don't know if they have an acceptable offer, and I say that knowing that they actually have a lot of players who are good players. So they have a lot of young guys who people kind of tend to hate on Lonzo Ball. I actually think Lonzo Ball will wind up being a very good player. But what you're looking for whenever you're trading a top five-ish player is you're looking for an A or an A-plus asset. And what you get there is you get a super high draft pick, or you get a player who, in the New Orleans actual language, is capable of becoming an all-NBA player. So that's what they're looking for. And unfortunately, Los Angeles doesn't really have that besides LeBron. So the reason the Pelicans are waiting is because they seem to think that Tatum is going to be someone who is a higher value of any of the players that they would receive in the Lakers trade. And that's really, I think, the foundation of why the Pelicans should wait, is because Tatum has a much higher ceiling than, let's just say, I think Ingram or Ball, or at least in my opinion, that's the case.
Well, this, of course, is about Anthony Davis, but I am curious, what kind of player do you think Jason Tatum can become? Is he somebody the Pelicans can build around?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that Tatum is someone, I don't think he's quite what some other people think he's going to be. Tatum is a very, very good one-on-one player. He can score in a variety of ways. He's sort of a throwback towards a time where, at this point, a lot of players are really just taking threes and getting to the rim. So any sort of variety within that is going to be different. And that's what makes Tatum special, is that Tatum's got really, really good footwork. He's got a good shot. He can post up. He can do a lot of different things to score. I think he'll wind up being at his peak, maybe a top, like a 10 to 15 player, like where he's not quite one of the best, not at least at the top, but he's going to be very, very good and possibly someone who could be making all NBA second teams and third teams. And that's a really good asset. So I think there's a lot of potential there.
You mentioned Jason Tatum as, somebody the Celtics would be willing to trade for Anthony Davis, but the Celtics aren't for sure that they'd be able to get Anthony Davis by for more than 1 year. I mean, I'm sure they want that, and they would make the trade assuming they could try to court him for more than a year and sign a long-term deal. But as far as they're concerned, they might only get him for 1 year. So is there anything else they would offer other than Jason Tatum, or is this just kind of a one-for-one deal, knowing that Anthony Davis might not re-sign with the Celtics and it's a 1 year rental?
So it's a good question because there's definitely risk there. The reason that they would do it, so first of all, any package with Davis would revolve around Tatum, but there would definitely be other picks in play.
Okay,
so right
good.
now they have several other picks. So like this year they're owed the hire of Sacramento Kings or Philadelphia. They're owed a first rounder from Memphis. It's actually protected this year, so it probably won't be coming here. But it's going to actually go to unprotected. It's top 6 protected next year and then unprotected in 2021. And then they have another first rounder, which is top 14 protected through 2020, and it converts to a second rounder from Los Angeles. So really it's those first 2 picks that are good ones. But what you're going to see is that they are willing to do this because their stars they're magnetic. So what they're thinking is Kyrie is not exactly 100% happy there, or there seems to be indications that he might want to go elsewhere. So what Davis does is if you acquire Davis, you lose Tatum, you lose a lot of picks, and yes, you're taking a risk that he can just walk in a year, but you're also giving yourself a much better chance to keep Kyrie there. And so it's not just about what's actually exchanged in the trade, it's about the situation that you're in because of the trade that you make, and that would give them a much better possibility of keeping Kyrie, in my opinion.
Is Jason Tatum who you want, like personally, in your opinion, is that who you want in this deal, or do you like other Celtics players?
I like Jason Tatum. I think I like Marcus Smart. I like Terry Rozier. I mean, these are players that aren't as they don't have quite the punch that someone like Tatum would have.
Would you rather the draft picks or those players?
Oh yeah, you're going to wind up getting both. So really, what's going to happen is you're going to have, because of the way the NBA trades are done, you're going to have to get salary to be in the same ballpark. So you're going to get what's called basically trade filler. So they might be young prospects that the Pelicans want, but they're really also there functionally just to make the trade work on a salary basis. Really, for me, it's Jason Tatum plus the picks, and really, it's a lot of it just Tatum. I think in terms of the players that are available through Los Angeles trades or through Celtics trades, I think he is the best. I think he has the highest ceiling. I think he's the at least in my opinion the least risky. And there's one other trade that we haven't mentioned that I want to kind of talk about is that New York is probably trying to make a pitch to both Kyrie and Kevin Durant this summer. So I would be on the lookout for them because they have a very high pick. They still have Kevin Knox and some younger players. I wouldn't be shocked if this summer or even now they're trying to make a pitch to get the Pelicans to trade.
Right.
But it's still, I think, it's still in the Pelicans' best interest to wait because you want to see how poorly New York finishes up because you need to figure out what kind of draft pick they have. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Because that's going to make a difference in how valuable that pick is.
Right. They could get the Dookie there, and they also have a lot of cap space. The Knicks do. I'm interested in the Lakers though because it seems to me that the Lakers have shown the most interest so far, at least now while the Celtics are out of the running. What can the Lakers do they've already offered us trades, right? Now, what can the Lakers do to improve their offer? I mean, it seems like they've kind of sent us the farm, but we've still said no way.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that they really just don't have, again, they have a collection of a lot of solid assets, but they just don't have that one foundational asset, like I said, Tatum was, that the trade will revolve around. And obviously, there's a talent evaluation here where the Pelicans don't seem to think that any of those people are of that caliber. If they did, I think the trade would already be done because they're certainly trying their best to get Davis over there. This is who LeBron wants. He's lobbied for him, and it's not so subtle, and I don't blame him. And LeBron is, despite being as amazing as he is, at some point he's just not going to be the player that he once was. He's got a tight window, and he certainly wasn't going to be happy having a mediocre team this year. He wants to compete for a championship.
Right, and they have to get past the Warriors too, so they need more than one star player there.
Yeah.
Okay, so the trade deadline is on Thursday, right? What do you think the chances are that Davis is shipped out before Thursday? I know you disagree with the concept, but what do you think the actual chances are that the organization does that?
Probably 10 or 20%. I think there's still a chance. There seems to be some dissent in the organization, at least according to some local reports, that some people feel like this is about, it's risky to wait till the summer, right? Because what if Boston reneges on their offer? What if something happens to Davis, God forbid? John Wall got hurt today at home, allegedly, and messed up his Achilles. I mean, if something like that happens, then we'd really be against it because now all of a sudden we lose a lot of our leverage. We lose the kind of assets that we'd be getting this summer. Right. So I think I think to some degree you have to capture that risk, and you have to say, well, maybe there is a chance that we should just take what is a decent deal. Certainly not making you in a great position, but you don't want to wind up with a whole lot less this summer. Now, I don't think that's the right avenue, but in terms of the chances, I think that's where it would be.
LeVar Ball, kind of a celebrity, or he wants to be at least. He's had statements on Lonzo, who would be a part of LA's package to us. He's had statements on Lonzo, or he not wanting to play for New Orleans. Is that actually a factor in the Pelicans' mind on whether they would maybe accept this trade from the Lakers, or would they probably ship Lonzo out anyway?
I think they probably were rubbed the wrong way by it, but I think in terms of, the way that Lonzo is going to fall is that Lonzo at some point is going to get his next contract off of his rookie deal, and because of the way that the NBA does first-round picks, there really is a lot of control with the teams that have these players through their rookie contracts. Porzingis, I think, is even threatening that he wants to not take the extension and basically do a qualifying offer, which makes him unrestricted. So, that's the risk that you would take, is that Lonzo would say, well, forget about the big bucks or whatever contract you're going to give me. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take this lower contract for the 5th year and then become an unrestricted free agent after that year. So there is some risk there. Yeah, that would be where it would go wrong.
Because Lonzo would be probably the best player in that package. Do you agree with that?
So I'm higher on Lonzo Ball than I think a lot of people are. I actually think he's one of the smartest players I've ever watched. Now, his problem is that he can't shoot worth anything right now, and that's a big problem for an offensive player. His defense is really good. I think he's one of the best instinctive defenders I've ever seen. And I don't say that I'm not trying to pump him up more than he should be. I think he's that good of a defender, and I think the way that today's NBA works, the ability to switch between positions and to be smart and to be a great team defender is so valuable. So, is he the best
defense.
player?
Yeah, we need defense too.
Yeah, our defense is, well, at this point we're going to be probably pretty bad after this trade, at least for the time being, because you're really shifting your timeline down the road. So at this point it doesn't matter a whole lot. But in terms of at the end of all of this, when we are competing and whenever our window does arrive, yeah, you do want players who can play both ways, and his defense is I think going to be excellent. It's really about his shot. That's more of a question mark. So I think I have him a little bit higher than Ingram personally. I'm sure you would find some people who would disagree, though.
LeVar Ball wasn't the only father of an NBA player making noise involving around this deal. Anthony Davis, his father, came out and said, called Boston out for their lack of loyalty and stuff like that. How much stock do you really put into those comments, and do you actually think it really affects Davis's chances of going to Boston?
No, I think what they're trying to do is, again, it's both his agent and his dad are basically trying to say he'll go to just the Lakers. Oh, he'll go to just these four teams, and they left out Boston on purpose. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it to where Boston doesn't want him, which kills the Pelicans' leverage, which then gives the Lakers the best chance to deal for him right now. And I think that's what all of this is basically geared towards.
Oh, so you think it's kind of a ploy by the agents, basically?
Oh, I feel quite sure that that's just them trying to get leverage on the Pelicans not trading the Celtics and trying to get rid of him earlier, which means that the Lakers would have a really good shot.
Gamesmanship, if you will. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. My last question before I shift to the management here. I was curious, you mentioned a list earlier of his preferred destinations. And I know that the Los Angeles Clippers and the Milwaukee Bucks were two of the teams on the list. Are they actually contenders, or are they just put in there for, I don't know, you tell me. What do you think of that?
I think that they're trying to pick out teams that they know the Pelicans won't trade him to. I think that's
interesting.
They added teams. Yeah, so the Knicks just made a big deal. Now maybe they are actually keen on the Knicks or something like that. But I think they're including teams that there's just basically fluff. They're just trying to include some teams that seem like, oh well, maybe he really does want to go there. The Bucks don't have anything to trade us because they're not trading us Giannis, and we're not taking anybody else back. So I mean, I think that's ultimately what they're trying to do.
Okay, so you expect AD to, at least in 2020, to end up playing for the Boston Celtics, and you expect Jason Tatum and maybe some draft picks to be the trade. If you had to say right now, is that what you're saying? That's your prediction?
That would be my prediction, and then I think after that, it might not even be the Lakers. It might be the Knicks trying to get him for whatever that pick winds up being, 1, 2, 3, or whatever, because they're pretty bad this year, and they have a really solid. Well, there are 4 teams that are really gunning for for the best player, and they're going to stay in the bottom 4. And because of the lottery system revamp, they're going to be an equal distribution of odds among those top teams for those top picks, or at least for the top few. So you're going to see New York getting a pretty good chance for this.
I want to know what you think about Anthony Davis kind of forcing his way out. I want to know, not that I blame the player, I really don't. And I think most Pelicans fans or fans, at least non-casual fans who actually really watch the team, would never blame AD for this. But I want to know who is more to blame for AD forcing him out. Is it ownership, management? Is it coaching? Is it the players? Is it the health of the team? Certainly, all of those things have played a role, but I want to know who you blame the most.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point that it's not just one thing. I don't think anything's ever clear cut, but I do think if you have to blame one thing, you have to blame whether it's ownership or management, whoever's been making the decisions. That whole thing with Loomis and Dell and all of that has always never been super clear to me. But whoever's making the decisions, I mean, I think they've actually made a lot of good decisions in the last few years. But I mean, we've had Davis for some time now, and they've made the playoffs only a handful of times. They've only won one playoff series with Davis. I mean, Look, I mean, that's what happens when you have a great player who's a transcendent talent and he only gets through one playoff series. What do you expect him to do? He doesn't want to be here. And I really don't blame him.
So you think it's mostly an issue of not surrounding him with talent or a good supporting cast?
Yeah, I mean, there's bad luck, of course. The injury luck was awful throughout his whole time here. But, I mean, in terms of what we put around him, I mean, with someone like Davis, you should be hitting close to 50 games almost every year, even in the West. I mean, I know you have to have something there besides Davis, but still, like that, I just think that they could have done a much better job of surrounding him with talent. And, I know that they've done a terrible job, but this is what happens. You're against the clock. As soon as a player becomes that good, you need to figure out how to surround him with the right kind of talent to be consistently making the playoffs, and then also to be progressing throughout the playoffs. It's inevitable that he was going to ask to leave.
Okay, and we'll talk more about the Pelicans' future right after this. Before we start the next quarter, guys, there's a difference between having insurance and actually being insured. If you want to feel secure about the things you care about most, State Farm agent Josh Lorando will have you covered. Quality customer service, great communication, and no gimmicks. His branch is located right here in Mid-City, New Orleans, and he's my go-to for home, flood, car, and life insurance. Seriously, I don't advertise anything that I don't use personally, and I'm one of his many satisfied clients. Do something today that your future self will thank you for. Hit up Josh Lorando at State Farm Mid-City. Josh Lorando at State Farm Mid-City. Talk about the Pelicans going forward. This season, should the Pelicans shut down Anthony Davis, assuming he's not traded by the deadline?
I say 100% yes. I think you can look no further than last year to look at what happens when, a player has a serious injury and how that impacts his value. I mean, we lost Cousins to an Achilles injury, and then he signs for $5 million, which is less than he would have gotten elsewhere. But I mean, will he be the same player long term? I mean, I know he's having some talent, some good play this year, but I wouldn't say he's going to be the same player that he necessarily was for a long time. You don't want to take that chance. John Wall just got hurt, at home, but he's much more likely to be hurt playing, and I think you got to shut him down. I mean, just don't take that chance.
I agree. Are there any rules preventing teams from doing that sort of thing?
I don't know of any that the whole thing with the injuries has always been a little strange. Where it seems like there are some injuries that come out of the woodwork that might not necessarily be true. Davis has actually come out and stated that he was ready to play the last game, and the Pelicans just didn't want him to play.
And that may or may not.
He said he doesn't blame
rules.
us.
Yeah, exactly. That may or may not violate rules, and in those woodwork injuries, it has to do with tanking, right? Do you think the Pelicans should be tanking?
I mean, tanking is so we're not really in a position to be in the top 5 in terms of the lottery odds, but I would say that we are in a position to have a pretty solid pick this year. Really what we should be doing is we should be developing talent that's going to be here for a little bit longer. So you talk about guys like Jahlil Okafor is on contract for another year. Frank Jackson is a younger guy we need to give time to. Like, you really want to be developing them and giving them game time as much as you can and see what we have in them, because this is that opportunity where winning doesn't matter. You play those guys and you see how it shakes out. I mean, that's the reality of it. You're not necessarily trying to lose, but you're not putting yourself in the best position to win today, and that certainly is the case when Davis is sitting.
Right, yeah. And that is my definition of tanking, in case you were wondering. But I know the NBA tries to be sly about it. Players are always nicked up. You can always blame stuff on injuries. But when you're not actually fielding or courting the best team that gives you the best chance to win, I do think you are actively trying to tank. But people have different definitions on tanking, and there's different connotations by it. Some people totally believe in it and think it's the best strategy for the NBA, and other people are dead against it. Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum of if you ran an NBA team, would you ever try to do some of these things that we just talked about to quote unquote tank, or do you just not really believe in that philosophy?
No, it's part of the game. I absolutely think, especially for smaller markets, I think that's the way to go. I think you really do yourself a disservice by, if you're not going to get into the playoffs, then why would you try? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think, especially given our position. Now, I think there are some circumstances where it might not make sense to tank, especially if you don't own your own pick. If you don't have your own pick, then certainly there's no incentive to tank. But in terms of a strategy, I mean, especially for smaller markets, that's how you acquire elite talent. Is you get to the top of the draft, you take your chance. It's not ever a sure thing, but that's how you do it. That's the risk that you take, and that's certainly the strategy for people who are not in any position to win today.
Right, and it's all about. In the NFL, you don't have the job security to really tank because they fire you after 1 or 2 bad years if you start. But it's really, in the NBA, I can imagine it's about convincing, the management and the ownership that you have a long-term plan, and you've seen it be successful before, so it's more likely that they might get on board with that as long as they're patient.
I was gonna say, yeah, no, I think to that point, I think Dell's job, I certainly wouldn't think as a certainty for next year. So I think it's something to where, management is going to probably protect its own interest beyond Dell. So let's just say the ownership and Loomis and all of them are probably going to be, Dell, you can only do so much because we don't want to be winning right now. So I certainly think that there's going to be some oversight to make sure that organizational goals are met, and it's not becoming something to where anybody's trying to save his job. And I'm not saying that Dell would necessarily try to do that, but you have to make sure that interests are aligned. at that level.
Yeah, and keeping along with the I don't want to call it a tanking discussion, but the possibility of more or less tanking. We do have assets on our team. We have Miritic, we have Julius Randle, we have Drew Holiday, and then Etuan Morris had a pretty good year. Are these guys that we could maybe trade and get assets for the future, or are these guys that maybe we should probably, maybe sign long term and build around for the future?
I think Mirotic is the obvious guy. They're actually shopping Mirotic, and that was discussed publicly. I think it was Woj that leaked it, but they're trying to trade Mirotic, and I think that's the right move because there are a lot of teams right now in the middle of the pack. They might be trying to get a little bit of extra oomph before the playoffs. And those are kind of teams where you can trade someone like Mirotic. You can get a first-round pick. He's gone after this year anyway because his contract is over. So if he's not re-signing, there's no sense in. I mean, you just cash him out, get something else for him, and say thank you for your service and goodbye. I mean that's. So I think Randall is a little bit more. I could see both sides of it. I could see someone. We don't have bird rights on him, which basically means that we can't pay him. We can't be over the cap and pay him whatever we want. But there are other things where, I think that we would want to keep him if we could keep him to a manageable contract. Now, Drew, I've heard that they do not want to trade for any reason. And I could see both sides of that too. But I first of all, I love Drew. I'd like to see him on a great team because I think he deserves it. He's certainly been through a lot with his wife and everything, but he's also just done an awesome job here. I feel like he's always given his best here. But they want to keep him around. They want him to be part of the rebuilding process, or at least that's what they're saying. Go ahead.
Just curious, what could we trade Drew for right now? Like, what do you think we could actually get for him?
I think we could get a pretty high pick for him. Teams that are tanking are probably not super interested in getting Drew, so you probably wouldn't get an elite pick. And I think you could get, a pick maybe around 8 to 12. I think you could get maybe a couple young players with that. I think that would be sort of the package that someone would go for. And because he's a great player, and look, for all that's been said about Dell and all the other people, that was a good contract. And a lot of people did not think he should be paid that much, and now he's worth even more than that. And he's been a great player and a great asset to the franchise.
Right. Are there any other ones that you kind of want to stick for the future? Maybe some young guys?
I'm not super keen on a lot of the players. I think they're okay. I think Frank Jackson could turn into something good. I don't necessarily think he's going to be a starting caliber player, but he could be a good guard off the bench. I like some of the things I've seen. Diallo, I'm not super high on. I think Jaleel has shown some good things this year, and certainly after the first few awful years of his career, I think that's been a nice shift. So it's really Jaleel and Frank Jackson, and then again Randall if he wants to stay. I think Mirotic should be traded, and then whatever they wind up doing with Drew.
At the end of the season, let's say hypothetically, we're not going to wish this on any team, but hypothetically, the Pelicans start dropping games. They start doing some of the things that you described. We'll call it player development or unforeseen injuries, whatever you want to call it. If they tank or whatever, is this the end for Alvin Gentry and the coaching staff, or do you think it's worth it to kind of ride him and see what we do in terms of the rebuilding process?
I don't think Alvin Gentry has really made a positive or negative difference enough to where, he should definitely be fired or, he definitely deserves to stay. I think he's done more or less what he should be expected to do given the talent he had around him. This offense is great. He's done a great job with the offense. I know Chris Finch has been instrumental in all of that as well. He's one of our assistant coaches. I think it depends on who you replace him with. I think if you feel like there's a better coach out there that would make this team significantly better, then yeah, you cut him. But I think otherwise, I don't see. I think that it'd be worth evaluating whether or not he can be a part of the future because I think he's done okay. I think he's done all right.
Do you have any coaches in mind that are out there that may fit well with this team?
People say Thibodeau. Thibodeau had a weird run with the Timberwolves because Thibodeau was both the GM effectively and the coach. I think that's a terrible idea. Would it be worth? I don't even think it's worth Thibodeau because I think Thibodeau, maybe he's a better coach than Gentry, but Thibodeau runs his players into the ground. He just plays them so much, and with what we're learning about minutes and injuries, I think it's I don't want that guy anywhere near a prize asset at this point.
Hey, the Pelicans can't get any more injured than they have been in the last couple of years. Maybe all that, maybe that he'll whip them into shape, and they'll be good for him. Well, I've heard a lot about Becky Hammon, and I want to get your thoughts on her.
I mean, I know that the Spurs speak very highly of her. Honestly, it's hard for me to evaluate how good an assistant coach is because it's hard to determine who's doing what.
Right.
I hear good things about her, so certainly it sounds like she's a strong candidate for the next coaching position that opens up wherever that is. But I mean, I don't know enough about her as an individual coach because I haven't seen her as an individual coach. So,
and it's great for sports, and it's great, that we actually have a chance for females to be a head coach, but it is kind of a catch-22 because she's working under a great coach in Greg Popovich, arguably the best. But that's indisputably a great thing because she's learning under him. But the negative about it, of course, is how much is she really playing a big role there in San Antonio? Because Greg Popovich is probably doing his job over there, and he's probably doing a great job over there. So it's just kind of a catch-22. Yeah. It's tough to evaluate.
Yeah, it's definitely tough to evaluate any sort of assistant coach, and certainly Popovich is doing great things. So I mean, it's hard to tell. Whatever, I mean, his assistants, they go on to do things other places. So she might wind up being a great head coach somewhere, and that certainly would be awesome for the NBA.
My last Pelicans question: are we looking at like a 2-year rebuild here, or is it more of like a 5-year rebuild? I know a lot of it depends on who you hit on in the draft and stuff, but in your honest assessment right now, let's say maybe you think we're going to get Tatum. What are we looking at here? What can Pelicans fans expect going forward?
Well, I mean, I think if you get Tatum, I mean, you already have him and Drew. I think you'd have a decent team. I mean, I still think you'd have to get other pieces to become a very good team or a playoff team. So, I mean, as a rebuild, I mean, you don't want to rush it. That's actually kind of what happened, what we did with Davis, is they wanted to win now, and they wanted to get young veterans and to sort of marry the idea of, developing your young talent over time with the idea of, oh, well, they're old enough to still win some. What happened is we rushed it, and that wound up backfiring a good bit. So I'd say it's more of a 3 or 4 year thing. Hopefully Drew would want to stick around through that. At that point he would probably be into his 30s. So even then you're talking about maybe him not being a significant asset and all of that. So maybe you do trade Drew. I mean, I think Tatum would certainly be a good start to all of it, but we'd still be a good ways away.
Yeah, it's certainly a tough question because it really depends on a lot of factors, of course, but it seems like it's going to be at least a 2-year rebuild, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, at least a 2-year. I think more realistically, it's more of a 3 or 4 year rebuild, if that. I mean, you really got to hit on so many things, and it depends on what you mean by rebuild. If you mean making an okay team, then no, it might take 2 years. It actually might be much shorter. But if you're talking about building some sort of contender, I mean, that's a 4 or 5 year process.
Right. Do you think Dell Demps will be part of that process?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think Dell has been as bad as some people think he's been. I think the last few years he's actually been very good on an individual transaction basis. I think he's picked up some really good players. I don't think he's done enough to merit the tenure that he's had here. I think at some point you have to say, look, you've gotten a lot better, you've done a decent job, but we need to start fresh with management, and I think that should be the case in my opinion.
Right. Do you have anyone in mind for management?
No, I don't have anybody in mind for management.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what transpires before the deadline. Let's shift gears and talk Saints. Before we start the next quarter, guys, there's a difference between having insurance and actually being insured. If you want to feel secure about the things you care about most, State Farm agent Josh Lorando will have you covered. Quality customer service, great communication, and no gimmicks. His branch is located right here in Mid-City, New Orleans, and he's my go-to for home, flood, car, and life insurance. Seriously, I don't advertise anything that I don't use personally, and I'm one of his many satisfied clients. Do something today that your future self will thank you for. Hit up Josh Lorando at State Farm Mid-City. Josh Lorando at State Farm Mid-City.
So, Nick, a lot has been made about the NOLA no call 2 weeks ago in New Orleans. What do you make of the Saints fans' reactions? Do you think that they're reasonable? Do you think that they're unreasonable? What's your take on all of this?
we've seen an extremely intense response from the always loyal Saints fan base, Who Dat Nation. The lawsuits, the billboards, Super Bowl boycotts, there's T-shirts going around with Goodell as a clown on them. Our team captains and coaches are calling out the commissioner in public appearances and on social media. It's been crazy, but I actually love it from the perspective of, it shows how passionate and amazing the support is for the Saints. It kind of fortifies and strengthens my belief that the Saints really do have the best fans in America. And, you hear a lot of players throwing that around, a lot of athletes in various cities saying that about their fans to be nice, but here it's actually true. And the weird thing is, the rest of the world outside of New Orleans is collectively rolling their eyes and saying, quit being petty. It's over. It's time to move on. Get over it. And they're seeing all this stuff. And I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted here because I tend to dismiss the irrational responses from fans. As you know, I'm a very strong advocate of being unbiased and impartial. You got to be objective about your home team. Without reservation. You got to call it like you see it, good or bad. I'm not afraid to criticize the Saints. But the more I think about what transpired and the more I see this reaction and outcry resulting from it, the more I'm actually inclined to side with the, some would say, like irrational fans in this case. And that's not because I'm not over the loss, though. I certainly understand and comprehend that the Saints had plenty of chances to win the game. They're like 150 snaps every game. And certainly if it comes down to one call, I believe that the team hasn't done its job to put themselves in a position to not let one judgment call determine their fate. So you won't see me petitioning for a new game and all that hoopla. I think that kind of stuff may be a little bit over the top, probably is irrational. But with all that said, I do support the fans who are actually speaking up and the players who are calling out Commissioner Goodell. Because while I have moved on and accepted the fact that we lost, I still haven't moved on from the way that we lost. And I really do think that there's two different concepts there. I think there's a huge distinction. Because if you've moved on from the way that we lost, it means that you view the NOLA no call as, within the ordinary bounds, as permissible, as acceptable, like, stuff happens. But the truth is, it's really not okay. Because then you're kind of playing into the commissioner's hands. This is exactly what the league would want, is that you go quietly into the night and the fans move on without controversy. And, the NFL wants the fans to forget about this and just move on. And I think that's why the response was mostly silence, because they assumed they would do that.
Yeah, so, you talked about Goodell and some of the thoughts on this from the Saints, from the coaches, the players on Goodell. So in your world, what would you have wanted Goodell to do? And so how exactly do you feel like he's fallen short?
Well, I think his response is pathetic, honestly. The fact that the NFL didn't publicly address the issue until they absolutely had to. They were forced to because of an annual mandatory press conference during the Super Bowl week. That happens every year. So they didn't. If that press conference didn't happen, I don't even know if he would have mentioned anything about it. So, and it's funny because during the press conference, it's like you're watching it, and every time I see Roger Goodell has an interview, like, I think about that great quote. I think it's a movie quote. It goes something like, "It's amazing how someone can talk so much but say so little." I don't know what it's from, but I love that line. And that's what I think of every time I see Goodell on a press conference. The first step is acknowledging that you have a problem, okay, with officiating here. Because obviously this isn't the first game that we've seen determined on a horrible call. And about the only noteworthy quote that came from his entire press conference is that Goodell blamed the call on, quote unquote, human error. But, okay, so you at least indirectly acknowledge that there's, a human mistake was made. But the league hasn't reprimanded the ref who committed the, egregious error, which is curious in my opinion. But more importantly, the league doesn't seem interested in finding a solution. And that, to me, is what's really unacceptable.
So help me here, because I'm a little bit more uninformed about this. But, what I had heard is that they had several refs that are affiliated with Los Angeles or California in some way I mean, is that true? And then two, what are the optics around that?
If you start talking about the refs being from Los Angeles, you're entering that dark black hole of conspiracy theories, I would say. And I read a lot of them. I think that I really do. I'm not afraid to admit it. I think they're interesting. It's not even just sports related. I read conspiracy theories all the time. I want to know what people think when they say we didn't land on the moon, or Wilt didn't score 100 points, or whatever. The games are rigged, and whatever the government conspiracies. I'm into all that stuff. But obviously, most of them are circumstantial hogwash at best. I mean, but the optics here are bad for so many reasons that at a minimum, no one should actually rule out the possibility that the worst call in the history of sports was actually, could have been intentional and malicious. And that seems crazy to say, but I believe it's actually naive to think that there's no way this multi-billion-dollar sports entertainment business, led by the most powerful commissioner in all of sports, couldn't try to influence the outcome of the game in its favor if given the opportunity. Because, this wasn't just an ordinary game. Even beyond the stakes of the game, to punch your ticket to the Super Bowl, it's a bad look because it's undeniably better for the NFL's bottom line that the Rams are going to the Super Bowl and not the Saints. That's indisputable. The Rams, controversially moved to Los Angeles, and the league is desperately trying to build a market there. They haven't hidden that. They are constructing a league new office in Los Angeles. They have a state-of-the-art stadium coming in 2020. They have a Super Bowl being hosted there in 2022. They put another team, the Chargers, that have had no business being in Los Angeles because they're desperately trying to develop a football market there and to justify their moves. Los Angeles is a much bigger market than New Orleans, and yet they're still struggling to get fans. If you're at the NFC Championship, or even at the Super Bowl, there's no Rams fans. They don't exist. They're barely out there, still, despite the league's efforts. And it's super convenient for the NFL that the moment all of this was put in place, the moment this is all put in place, the Rams are suddenly in the Super Bowl getting national support that an otherwise vacant fan base desperately needs. And it's even better for the NFL that they're facing off against the team that everybody hates and everybody wants to see beat, the New England Patriots. So now we have the entire country, of course, except for Boston and New Orleans, the entire country rooting for Los Angeles. And that's awfully convenient. And I just think that there's so many stars that line up for the NFL not to at least pose the question of whether there was some kind of foul play. And when you combine all this with the fact that, the ref hasn't been reprimanded, I guess it's hard to punish the ref if he's just following orders, some people would argue, but and you also...
That's what we call a scapegoat, Nick.
Yeah, and you also combine all that with the commissioner's lack of response, and that the league has refused to let coaches challenge penalties in the past, or, that they refuse to implement modern technology for sideline and goal line cameras. It almost seems like the NFL is more interested in refs keeping the power to influence the outcomes of the games for whatever reason than to actually make the game more fair. And it's fishy. And again, I won't go as far to say the non-call was absolutely intentional and clearly influenced by the league, but I'm not ruling anything out either. I'm pretty sketched out, to be honest. I think it's a horrible look for the NFL.
So give me a percent here, because you put me on the spot at that earlier. So what percent chance do you think that non-call was intentional?
I'm going to say it's more likely than not.
Yeah, and that's terrifying to me because you are very objective, and that to hear that is not encouraging. So yeah,
and I love the NFL too, and I'm obviously still going to keep watching, and I obviously still, if there is anything involved, I don't believe that, I don't think that the whole league is rigged or anything crazy like that. It just seems like I said, a lot of stars are aligning, and I gotta say, the league this is not just about this game. The league has done a lot in the past to make me kind of question where they really stand on how important it really is to them to make games fair. I mean, there are so many solutions that they could implement to take or at least minimize the judgment calls or the wrong judgment calls that are determining the outcomes of the games. There's so many solutions that they could implement here, but they're just not doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't. I mean, from my perspective, I think the most egregious thing of all of this is that, like, how can they not challenge something that bad? You know, like at the end of the game, why is that not allowed? I mean, like you're saying, is it something where they want to give the refs that amount of power? Is it something it's an oversight? I mean, that seems unlikely. It just kind of crazy to me, like you're saying, that they don't have the kind of technology or they're not utilizing that kind of technology to be making these games more fair, especially at the end of the game. And again, there's so many snaps, like you're saying, but like these snaps, you have the chance to at least get a good handle on these snaps, and they're not doing it, and that's just nuts. So
it is, and I think that's a great point about the fact that you should be able to challenge penalties. I mean, because the NFL, that would be one of the first, if I was commissioner, that'd be one of the first things I would implement. You should be able to challenge penalties, but they refuse to adopt it. I believe you should be able to challenge any penalty, not just PI, not pass interference, any penalty, because there's just so many penalties that are wrongfully determining the outcomes of the games, and the refs are put in the spotlight. And I'm not naive. I get that reffing is a very difficult job. I get that they will get things wrong. And I also understand that refs' judgment calls will always be a part of sports. No matter what technology you implement, reffing and getting wrong calls will always be a part of sports. It just will. It's something you have to accept. I would propose that you give coaches the chance to challenge those calls. And of course, I'd say a shoot till you miss style is appropriate. You don't want to be penalizing coaches if they keep getting things right. So you should let them shoot till they miss, challenge things until they get it wrong. And the cool thing is that if coaches, or the beneficial thing for the league is that if the coaches are allowed to challenge penalties, then not only will the game be decided more fairly, but even if a coach is like out of challenges at the end of the game and they can't challenge a late call, at least you can blame the coach. You can place some of the blame on the team and the coach for wasting his challenges or getting one wrong earlier. Right. And all of a sudden, the blame shifts from the refs making this huge mistake to the coaches. And then you could dispel any type of conspiracy or direct influence by the NFL, because now the coaches do have a say in determining, of overruling these penalties, and the blame can be placed on them. And the only reason I see that they wouldn't implement it is that they just want the refs to have the control. I just don't see any reason why they wouldn't implement something like that. It's almost like they really want the refs to stay in power for whatever reason. It's fishy to me.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would change, I think that's all correct, and I think the point that you made about the coaches having some say in it is great. I said the only thing that I would change, instead of shoot till you miss, I just say you have your two challenges, and then as long as you're getting them correct, there's no you basically keep it. So if you miss one, that's gone. Now let's shoot you till you miss, basically. That would be the only change, but I think you hit the nail on the head.
Oh, I'm fine with giving coaches even more leeway, obviously. I mean, the one drawback that fans or the NFL might say with that proposal, they might say something like along the lines of, oh, well, we don't want to be reviewing more than we are already. The game's already a little too slow. I mean, even though in reality it's because of commercials, but the game's already too slow. The answer to that is you need to upgrade the dinosaur replay system and the prehistoric technology that they use within the games. Michael, think about this.
Yeah.
Think about this right now. It's 2019, and we can't get a camera on the goal line in the National Football League. It's amazing. No, it's honestly laughable.
Wait, so they don't have one goal line camera?
They don't have set goal line cameras. It's amazing. It's incredible to think about. Yeah, it's laughable. And then
that's crazy.
They also don't have sideline cameras. Sideline and goal line, two basic concepts. Why don't we also forget cameras, even though they'd be so easy to implement? But the irony here is that they have a freaking sky cam in the air.
That's what I was about to say.
Going in the stadium. They have a sky cam.
It looks like an alien device.
Alien.
Yeah.
They have the technology to do this, but yet we can't put a stationary goal line camera on the sidelines of the goal line. And also we can't put sensors in the ball or sensors on the sideline to do the same thing. And sensors sounds a little more complicated, but it's really not. Think about the other sports here. Other sports have implemented this technology. And like I want to give you an example. Is I was watching the Super Bowl, only the second half. Don't get mad at me, Saints fans. I boycotted the first half. I was watching the Super Bowl, and in the second half, the Rams punter Johnny Hecker hit this punt out of bounds, and it was still probably 30 yards in the air when it went out of bounds. And the refs are standing on the sidelines, and they have to judge exactly where the ball went out of bounds, like where it actually crossed the line, but it's like 30 yards in the air. And you see these two refs running the ball, and they just look so clueless, like, oh, I think it's at the... One ref's like, oh, yeah, I think it's at the 27-yard line. And then the other ref is like, oh, I think it's at the 39-yard line. You're like, that's a 12-yard difference. Are you crazy right now?
Yeah,
and then,
that's
but
huge.
So sensors in the ball or on the sidelines or cameras and stuff like that, it's not like the league, it's not like the technology doesn't exist. Other sports have implemented it. Hockey, there's like a little red light, and there's a siren behind the goal that goes off whenever the puck crosses the goal line. In soccer, they just did this for the World Cup. Offsides goals are now reviewed, and they are ruled on in seconds. Seconds. And then in tennis, the best replay system in all of sports. A player raises their racket. All he does is just raise his racket up in the air. Immediately and instantly, you see an animated replay of where the ball lands, and it's on the Jumbotron for everybody to see. That's amazing, and that's crucial too, for everybody to see it. Total transparency. They want tennis has no qualms about, they're totally transparent with their refs. They want everybody to see exactly where this ball landed, and that's awesome. And I get that in the NFL, the replays are more nuanced than tennis. You have to judge more things than a ball landing in or out of bounds. But these reviews take 3 minutes. Think about the concept here. If you're not familiar with it, the reviews take 3 minutes. A ref goes into the booth or he goes on the sideline. So he's got to run to the sideline and view this Microsoft tablet. It looks like an iPad. And he checks for the angles that the crowd doesn't see. And they confirm the call with a crew in New York with a bunch of Vegas odd makers. No, I'm just messing. With a bunch of refs.
Yeah, all right.
With a bunch of refs in New York. And it takes about 3 minutes. They usually go to commercial when they do it. And in the stadium, you're just sitting there waiting. You don't get to see the replays that they're actually looking at.
So you think we should have Dean Blandino on the big screens in the stadiums, or?
I mean, I think...
Isn't that his name?
I think that the ref... well, that's one of them. That's one of the heads there. But I think that the ref... all the angles that the refs are seeing should just be shown to why are they trying to keep it hidden?
Yeah.
Why does it go to like a little iPad?
Right.
Why does the ref even look at the iPad? The Jumbotrons, have you seen Cowboy Stadium? The Jumbotrons are huge now. If the ref can't see what's going on in the Jumbotron, then he shouldn't be reffing because he needs glasses. I mean, honestly, why don't they just show the replays on the Jumbotron in the stadiums and just let everybody watch them and then let the ref determine it from there? It seems so sketchy that they go to their own little personal iPads, and then it's with a crew in New York of ex-refs and heads of officiating. And the funny thing is, the other humorous thing I find about it is that it's not like the NFL can't afford it. Michael, I mean, we're talking about they make billions of dollars in profit annually, and more than any other American major sports league combined, like all of them combined. And so the technology not only exists, but the NFL clearly has the resources to adopt the technology, but the NFL refuses to do it. It's 2019. We don't have cameras on the sidelines of the goal line, and does that the question you need to ask yourself, like, forget the Saints game, but bigger picture here. Does all of that sound like a league that really cares about fairness? Not to me. To me, it sounds like a league that wants to give its refs more opportunities to decide, games on judgment calls. And until the NFL allows coaches to challenge penalties, until they actually put cameras on the sidelines and the goal lines or sensors or whatever, I don't trust the NFL. I don't see why anyone should, honestly. It's crazy to me. Our fourth and final quarter of the show is our Best Questions segment, where we tackle your best questions. Reminder, you can tweet us your questions at Best Podcast NOLA using the hashtag Best Questions, and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of each show. Our first question here today is by Terry Smith from Abita. He wants to know, do you think the Saints offense was a little exposed in the Dallas game? We were still good, but it seems like our offense was never the same after that game. What's your take on this? I don't think the Dallas game exposed us, Terry, but I do mark that game as kind of a huge split in what happened with our offense this season. It was kind of a tale of two halves for Drew Brees, where everyone remembers he was in the running for MVP in the first 11 games with Pat Mahomes, and he was right there with him. It was a real debate, and he was awesome. Better than he's ever played before in his entire career. Weeks 1 through 11, I'm gonna reel off a couple of statistics here because we haven't done so yet. And me and Michael are stats guys, and Michael, I'm gonna reel off a couple of stats for you, because I really do think that they tell the story here. There's very stark splits, huge contrast. In weeks 1 through 11, the first 11 games of the season, Drew Brees had 29 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. 29 and 2. But starting from the Dallas game onward, that's the final 6 games. 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So he went from 29 to 2 in the first 11 games to the final 6 games, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. In the first 11 games, Drew Brees had an 8.77 yards per attempt. And if you don't know this about me, yards per attempt is one of my favorite statistics for quarterbacks. I think it sheds a lot of light on how good a quarterback really is over time. First 11 games, 8.77 yards per attempt. Last 6 games, 6.55. First 11 games, 122.5 quarterback rating, highest in the NFL. 122.5. Last 6 games, 87.7 quarterback rating for Drew Brees. Guys, the average NFL quarterback rating this year was 92.7. And in Drew Brees' last 6 games, he had 87.7. He had a below average quarterback rating. Drew Brees did in his last 6 games. Pretty decent sample size. So why is that? I think it's because we rarely push the ball downfield. I think that we rarely attempted passes further than 15 yards after week 11. And I think part of that was because Teron Armstead, our left tackle, our best pass protector, was out for weeks 11 through 15. And that's certainly part of it. And we were also missing Ted Ginn, our best deep threat. So you can debate the idea, the concept that, maybe Drew Brees didn't have enough time to throw because he was missing his best pass protector, and we were missing our best deep threat. So it makes sense that we didn't attempt as many downfield passes. The flaw of that theory is that when they both returned in week 15, Drew Brees was still inaccurate weeks 15 onward up until week 19, including playoffs, for lack of better words. So I hate to say this, but I do think the primary reason our offense took a step back is due to Drew Brees' declining arm strength. And I don't think Brees' arm is shot, but I do think it got tired as the season progressed, at least in part because of his age. If you're objective about anything, Drew Brees and the offense, mainly Drew Brees, did not look the same.
Let me ask you one question on that before we move on. Is there was there sort of like a strength of schedule difference in terms of the defenses that we were playing? Was it anything like that? You talked about Armstead. Is there anything else where all colored together, it would sort of, make it somewhat intuitive that he wouldn't be as good? No, not necessarily that big of a difference, but is there any other context that we're missing here, like good defenses or anything like that?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you why it's a great question, because the next thing I would do if I was preparing for fantasy football, and we will have a lot of fantasy football shows on this podcast, of course, a little plug for the future, but the next thing I would do if I was grading Drew Brees' game log for fantasy is I would want to know who his opponents were. Who did he face? Was it all tough teams? But But Dallas, yes, tough defense. But the week after that, we played Tampa Bay. Now, it was a little rainy out there. I won't discredit that. But Tampa Bay had one of the worst defenses and secondaries in the NFL this year. Carolina had one of the worst secondaries in the NFL. That was the next week. Pittsburgh, also not a good defense, week 16. Then week 18, Philadelphia, a team that Drew Brees shredded in I believe it was week 9 before the split that I gave you, week 12, that they won 42-7. Michael, we were at that game. Drew Brees was unstoppable. And then obviously Philly's going to make adjustments. Obviously their cornerbacks were a little healthier in the next, where they were healthier in the next game. But Philadelphia was the next game, and then the Los Angeles Rams were the next game. And I'm not even saying he played badly in the playoffs in the Eagles and Rams game, but I am saying that it just looked like I liked how Terry put it, actually. Our offense didn't look the same. And I think in large part it had to do with Drew Brees kind of losing his fastball, for lack of better words. I hope it's not a long-term thing. Let's move on to our next question. Our next question is by Keegan Keller out of Seattle, Washington. Love the distance there. He wonders, will the Pelicans fans boo or cheer Anthony Davis when he comes back next year in another uniform?
Okay, so I think Davis has done it. Obviously, Davis is a great player. I don't fault him for wanting to leave. I think the whole idea that players owe loyalty to the team and all that, I think it's typically done in a very hypocritical way. So if Davis was terrible and he was on a huge contract for multiple years, much like Ashik was, the Pelicans fans would be screaming for him to go. Get rid of him any way you can. Boo him. They actually booed Ashik. And look, Ashik, especially at the very end, was pretty bad. And when I say pretty bad, I actually should say terrible. But Ashik tried. Like, Ashik was literally, if you watched Ashik during the warm-ups, Ashik was he was staring in front of the basket trying to figure out how to, finish her on the rim. It looked like he was facing down his worst fear. So, Ashik was, legitimately trying, and he was terrible. But people were booing him, and, look, I mean, we paid him that, and he played. He played the best of his ability. He sucked, but that was the reality. And I think this whole idea that Davis owes us this because whatever, I think it's just hypocritical. So to that question, I do think he will be booed. I think some people will be taking the wrong way that, he forced his way out of here and all that stuff. I don't blame him at all. He doesn't done enough for me to really think, I want to be behind this player wherever he goes. I do feel like that was Drew. So I mean, yeah.
To be clear, you do think Pelicans fans will boo him, and I tend to agree with you there. I kind of see it as like a 70-30. When I saw this question, it was a really interesting question because it's kind of out of the box question. But it will happen, and it's a good question because this event will happen. I kind of see it as a 70-30. I think 70% of the fans will probably boo. Where are you? You kind of alluded to you not booing.
I try to be objective like you do, and I mean, I definitely get mad. Usually when I feel like something is inconsistent in the way that refs are calling it, I'll usually acknowledge it both ways. But for the most part, I'm pretty chill when I watch games, so I will be doing absolutely nothing, and I do think that it will be 70-30, 80-20, something like that. I think most people will be booing, but there certainly will be some sort of group that will, appreciate what he's done here, and he has been great here.
Okay, so I want to mix it up a little because I do think there are certain factors in play here. I want to piggyback off this question. Do you think that if Anthony Davis won a championship in New Orleans, do you think that there would still be boos if he forced himself out, or do you think a championship kind of resolves all blame?
I don't think it resolves all blame, but I think if he won a championship and then the team just went to hell, so to speak, if they won 20, 30 games for the next couple of years and it was just obvious that he was way too talented to be on this team, I think at that point, he'd sort of get a pass. Now, if we won a championship and he left, kind of like Durant left, even though Durant didn't win a championship with OKC, but if he left in that fashion where they had a great team, but it wasn't just quite as good as another team, I mean, I absolutely think he would get lambasted the same way that he, may get lambasted when he comes back here now.
Yeah, I'm asking because it seems to me that the two big factors I think play a role in the booing. I think the first one is, what did he do for you? What did he accomplish, I guess, for your team? And he like you said, he only won one playoff series, and that may or may not have been his fault. Maybe he's partially to blame, but mostly other players, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I think the second thing is how, and you just alluded to it, is how does the player leave? Like what are the means by, how does he get out of town basically? And if it's a KD thing, then of course he's going to be booed. But knowing what you know about this scenario now, that he did demand a trade. He even got fined for it. So he did demand a trade.
Thanks for the 50,000 NBA. That was super helpful.
Yeah.
I'm being sarcastic. That's terrible. What a joke. I just these whole fines and stuff like that. Like the Sixers. I'm sorry. I'm going on a rant for just 10 seconds.
Go ahead.
The Sixers traded us Drew Holiday, and they didn't disclose the full injuries and stuff like that, and they got fined $3 million. And it turned out well for us, but I mean that's a joke. Like it's about your cap space, it's about your draft picks. You're creating a system where people can exploit stuff, and then there's no penalties. $50,000 is nothing. I think one of the guys at Bourbon Street Shots, Jason Calmes, was saying that it was like 5 minutes of playing time. I mean, what a joke! Like that's just dumb. Why even do it? I'd rather almost them not do it than do it and do it poorly.
It seems like it would be a good idea to, if a player commits a penalty, this is all of sports, this is the NFL too, it should be a percentage of his salary that year as opposed to just like, some set number. Like Anthony Davis has more of the limelight. Yeah. He's more of a public figure, and what he does matters more than what Solomon Hill does. It's just true. So if you find Solomon Hill for demanding a trade, like if you if you find him,
I would thank him.
Maybe that's a bad example. But if you find him the same amount as finding Anthony Davis, that's really an injustice for the NBA. And the NFL does the exact same thing. But I think it's a great question by Keegan. But we do have to move on to the next one. The next question is by Brooks Boswell from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. What is the most important thing that needs to happen for the Saints to get back to the Super Bowl? We need a consistent pass rush outside of Cam Jordan. And that's been the same answer that I've given for the last probably, it feels like ever since Cam Jordan became a Saint, that's been the same answer I've been giving. But disrupting quarterbacks has been problematic for years. And the Saints have finally made an aggressive move in last year's draft to address it when they sent this year's first-round pick to Green Bay to move up to select defensive end Marcus Davenport. And Davenport kind of had an underwhelming rookie year. He made a few splash plays, but they were very few and far between. And he kind of battled injuries for most of the year. But Davenport was overshadowed by defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, who had an amazing year, should have made the Pro Bowl, and opposite Cam. And when the Saints defense was on a tear, a lot of that was Sheldon Rankins. He had a breakout year, but he tore his Achilles, a devastating injury, and I would argue it had a huge impact on our playoff loss. But Davenport, because of Sheldon Rankins' torn Achilles, and because you know how long that can last, he might start the season next year on PUP and miss the first games. He might not even ever be his normal self, at least next year.
Right.
So Davenport, slow rookie year, quiet rookie year, has to step up in a big way in his sophomore season. And I repeat this every year, but the three most important traits teams need to win in order to win a Super Bowl in today's NFL. Three most important things. You have to have a quarterback, you have to be able to pressure the opposing quarterback, and you have to be able to protect your own quarterback. And fundamentally, that's the blueprint. Those are the three requirements, I'd say. And we can say all we want about the Saints not being in the game. We can blame the refs, whatever. But the one thing that the Rams and Patriots had that the Saints didn't have, the only thing that those teams had that the Saints didn't have, was a disruptive defensive line that consistently got pressure on the quarterback. I mean, if you watch the game, that much was clear. There was pressure on Brady all the time. There was pressure on Goff all the time. They made Goff look like a fool. And we couldn't get to Goff like New England could. We had one sack in the game against Goff. We only hit Goff 4 times. That's, the Patriots had 13 pressures and 4 sacks in the Super Bowl. They got to Goff. My only point is that to win a Super Bowl in this league, I would argue the second most important thing after having a good quarterback is your pass rush. And that's why I think Marcus Davenport is one of the keys to the team next year, if not the most important thing after Drew Brees. And that's the end of our fourth quarter. If you like what you heard, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Best Podcast NOLA. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our sponsors. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends, who dat.